At 17 years old, Yuta Okkotsu was one of the strongest sorcerers of his time, was classified as one of 4 special grade sorcerers, and was said by his mentor Gojo Satoru to quote, have the potential to surpass him. And he achieved all this even though at one point he had literally zero confidence. From a young age, Yuta was constantly bullied, isolated himself to the point where he tried to end himself, and witnessed the death of his girlfriend Rika only to have that same girlfriend haunt him for multiple years. And Rika was by no means a passive spirit. When a group of boys attempted to bully Yuta, Rika in retaliation literally scrunched the bullies up and shoved them into a locker, gravely injuring them. In this instance and other similar moments when Yuta isolated himself, turning Yuta into an extremely fearful and timid person. So then how did Yuta eventually change himself, turning from a fearful puppy dog to one of the strongest sorcerers of his era? Well, it all started when Gojo found Yuta. When Gojo found Yuta, Yuta was at the lowest point in his life. Yuta had no friends, no connection to his family, and even attempted to end his life, and a big reason for that was his girlfriend Rika. When Yuta was younger, he and Rika had a very cute relationship and even promised to marry each other. However, one day Rika was involved in a gruesome car accident and lost her life. As Yuta looked in disbelief at Rika's corpse, he uttered her name in horror, and this actually had unintended consequences. Yuta didn't know it at the time, but because of his genealogy, he had an extremely large amount of cursed energy, and because of this, by uttering Rika's name, he turned her into a cursed spirit. And not just any regular old cursed spirit, but one of the strongest to ever exist. Rika was so strong that her nickname was the Queen of Curses. Jujutsu High higher-ups doubted whether even Gojo could handle her, and even when Yuta was actively suppressing her from fully manifesting her body, just her arms alone were enough to fight and harm trained sorcerers. Rika was an extreme danger to anyone that she perceived as a threat, and unfortunately, because of her personality, she perceived many people as one. Originally, when Rika was just a human girl, she was a very sweet person that held a deep love for Yuta. However, when she was turned into a cursed spirit, she kept her love for Yuta, but he became almost twisted. Rika's personality became much more jealous and overprotective, and because of her strength and aggressiveness, this caused problems. As Rika was haunting Yuta, she became aggressive toward Yuta's family, viciously hurt and even maimed various bullies, and because of these actions made Yuta go into isolation where he became extremely fearful and depressed. Rika's actions also had the added effect of getting the attention of Jujutsu High higher-ups, and when they realized the strength of Rika, they decided the best course of action would be to mandate that Yuta be executed. However, surprisingly, Yuta didn't try to fight this, but actually welcomed it, believing execution would be for the better, and Yuta would have ended up executed if he hadn't met with Gojo Satoru. Funnily enough, Gojo had actually been the one assigned to execute Yuta, but when Gojo saw Yuta's potential, he instead tried to recruit him to Jujutsu High. While Yuta was initially against this and just wanted to go through with the execution, Gojo was able to convince Yuta to give Jujutsu High a try. And that ended up being one of the best decisions in Yuta's life. By attending Jujutsu High, Yuta was able to gain confidence, strength, and lifelong friends. However, initially he had a somewhat rough time with his classmates. Before meeting with Yuta, his classmates Maki, Panda, and Toge had heard about the incidents Yuta had gotten into and were aloof towards him at best. Maki even at one point said that she heard Yuta was a punk and planned to give him the silent treatment. However, when Yuta walked into the room, all his classmates were surprised. As soon as Yuta opened the door, all 3 of them could sense Rika's daunting presence and immediately jumped out of their seats ready to fight. But Rika, perceiving their actions as bullying, manifested her arms and roughed up Yuta's classmates, showing how strong she was. However, after this messy situation was cleaned up, Yuta had no time to rest as he was paired up with his classmate Maki and immediately thrown into a mission. And this is where Yuta was able to start unlocking his true strength. For the mission, both Yuta and Maki were dropped off at an elementary school and told to exercise the spirits there. Initially, because Yuta was so timid and inexperienced, Maki took the reins and defeated most of the curses. However, both Maki and Yuta were caught off guard when a massive spirit appeared and ate both of them. While both of them were figuring out how to get out of the spirit's stomach, they met 2 young boys and realized the spirit's stomach had a decaying effect. Because of Rika, Yuta had a resistance to curses, but Maki and the boys did not, so their condition started to drastically worsen. As Yuta witnessed this, he immediately believed he couldn't do anything and started to retreat into his shell. But as he was doing this, Maki grabbed him and motivated Yuta to break out of his self-doubt. Maki helped Yuta to ponder the reasons why Yuta had even started attending Jujutsu High, and it was because Yuta did not want to live his previous life of helplessness, isolation, and depression, but instead he wanted to gain the confidence to live. And once Yuta realized this, he couldn't just stand by and do nothing, and so turned to Rika for help. Once Yuta asked Rika for help, she fully manifested and went on a rampage, absolutely decimating the curse that ate them. And at one point, Rika was enjoying the moment so much that as she was destroying the curse, she stated that she loved the color red. As Rika was going on a rampage, Yuta managed to bring everyone to safety before collapsing. And when Yuta recovered, he was able to realize something new about his relationship with Rika. Yuta remembered that when he and Rika had first agreed to marry, Yuta had been the one to promise Rika that they would be together forever. By doing this, Yuta realized that he had put the curse of love on Rika, and he felt the responsibility to find a way to release this curse. And Yuta, with this understanding of his goals and newfound confidence, went headfirst into improving himself. For months after the elementary school mission, Yuta proceeded to train hard, often training with Maki and improving both physically and in weapons use. Yuta actually improved so much that with his improvements and the power of Rika, he was able to completely dominate the students of Kyoto Jujutsu High when they met for the Goodwill Games. However, as Yuta's strength grew and he went on more missions, he caught the attention of Geto. Now Suguru Geto at this point was Jujutsu High's public enemy number 1, however this was not always the case. At one point, Geto had attended Jujutsu High, had been best friends with Gojo, and had been a model student. However, through a series of events, Geto had an insane shift on his worldview and decided that the only way to have a peaceful world would be to wipe out anyone that wasn't a sorcerer. Because of this, Geto over the years posed as a religious leader and collected resources and created a plan, preparing for the right moment to strike. And Geto found his perfect moment when he found Rika. For Geto, his power was curse spirit manipulation, and so he was able to absorb curses and use them however he liked. So when Geto saw Rika's strength, he believed if he absorbed her power would be sufficient enough to fulfill his goal. However, because Rika was attached to Yuta, Geto could not absorb Rika until Yuta was out of the picture. And this was a problem because Gojo was constantly watching over Yuta, and while Geto believed he could defeat Yuta, he was not insane enough to think he could take on Gojo. Because of this, Geto staged an insane distraction where he had thousands of curses attack Kyoto and Shinjuku at the same time so that Gojo would be distracted. And the distraction worked. However, Geto was not prepared for how strong Yuta had actually become. When Geto initially got to Jujutsu High, it seemed like it was going to be a walk in the park, with Geto easily defeating any guards and basically trashing Yuta's classmates. However, when Yuta showed up, the situation became much more complicated. As Yuta saw Geto severely injure his friends, Yuta flew into a massive rage and started to fight Geto. Now Geto was by no means a pushover. He was very battle tested, had an incredibly powerful technique, and was considered one of the strongest sorcerers of his generation. However, because of Yuta's training and improved relationship with Rika, even with Geto's immense strength, he couldn't gain a significant upper hand. Throughout the fight, Yuta was learning and improving every second to the point where he was able to flawlessly copy his classmate Toge's technique and negate Geto's attack. And even at one point when it seemed like Geto had an advantage in hand-to-hand combat, Yuta somehow improved his speed and landed a massive shot on Geto. After all of this, Geto realized he couldn't win like this and was forced to bring out his ultimate technique, Uzumaki. Uzumaki was a technique where Geto would combine all stored curses into one huge energy blast, and Yuta, even with his improvements, knew he couldn't withstand that blast, so he turned to Rika. Yuta in this instance created a binding vow with Rika, promising his heart, body, and future if Rika would help him defeat Geto. By doing this, Yuta was able to release the limits on Rika's cursed power, and Rika went into a frenzy and started to charge an energy blast of her own. Both Geto and Rika then shot their energy blasts together, but in the end, Rika was more powerful and Yuta and Rika came out as the victors. In the aftermath of the fight, both Yuta and his classmates reveled in his victory, but Yuta had a promise to uphold to Rika. However, when Yuta went to Rika to fulfill his promise, her curse form disintegrated and she became the Rika of old. As Yuta looked on in confusion, Gojo appeared and explained the situation. Gojo had looked into Yuta's genealogy and had found that Yuta was actually related to an extremely strong sorcerer, and because of that, Yuta naturally had a ridiculous amount of cursed energy. Because of this, in the aftermath of Rika's car accident, Yuta had inadvertently cursed Rika, and his cursed energy had made her into the extremely powerful spirit she was. However, when Yuta had made that binding vow with Rika, it had actually broken the curse, because as the curse maker, Yuta was able to sever the curse as long as a cursed person did not desire any punishment. When Yuta learned of this, he actually felt terrible because he realized that he had forced Rika into such a terrible situation. However, Rika did not see the curse as a punishment, but instead as a blessing, stating that the years she spent with him were the happiest of her life. As the two had a heartfelt goodbye, Yuta was initially sad but came to accept letting go of Rika and went back to his newfound friends. And as time went on, Yuta continued to train and get stronger, even going to Africa to learn how to improve his skills. And while Yuta was gone in Africa for some time, he returned when Gojo was sealed. Now when Yuta returned to Jujutsu High, he came back to a situation where the entire Jujutsu world was in disarray because of Gojo's sealing. Curses were running rampant, many sorcerers were dead, and a Culling Game was about to begin, and Yuta was thrown into the midst of this. Initially, Yuta was actually tasked by Jujutsu higher-ups to execute Yuji for what happened in Shibuya, and Yuta actually agreed to this. Because of how Yuta had accepted the order to execute Yuji, it seemed like he had become very dark and cold. However, in reality, Yuta was still very good-hearted and agreed to kill Yuji so that he could fake Yuji's death in order to protect him. And during Yuta's time away, he had actually become more sociable and empathetic. Because when Yuji was still depressed over how Sakuna used his body to kill many people, Yuta sympathized with Yuji, saying that he didn't blame Yuji for whatever Sakuna had done. Yuta in his time away had been able to mature socially and emotionally. However, this was not the only thing that had changed, as was seen when Yuta participated in the Culling Game. The Culling Game was a game created by Kenjaku that pitted the strongest sorcerers in history against each other, and Yuta was not out of place. At this point, Yuta was considered the second strongest modern sorcerer only behind Gojo, and through his powers it showed. Yuta had an immense amount of curse energy, an incredibly powerful curse technique, and still had access to Rika. Well, somewhat, because while Rika's soul had gone to the afterlife, Yuta still had access to the cursed spirit that had once housed Rika's soul. Through this cursed spirit, Yuta not only had something that could physically manifest and fight for him, but also something that could store his cursed energy and tools. On top of that, Rika was the conduit to how Yuta could use his incredibly strong technique Copy. The bare basics of Copy was when Rika ate a body part of someone with a technique, Yuta could copy and use the technique at his will. How long Yuta could use the technique and how strong it was varied depending on the body part that was eaten, but regardless, the technique was incredibly strong and annoying to deal with. With all of Yuta's attributes and improvements, he was a force to be reckoned with, mowing down multiple extremely strong historical sorcerers, and later on, Yuta with the help of his comrades was even able to take down the creator of the Culling Game, Kenjaku. However, even with Yuta's incredible power, when he met Sakuna, Sakuna was just on a different level. Earlier on, Yuta and friends had released Gojo from his seal, and Gojo went on to fight Sakuna. However, in a massive battle, Sakuna defeated Gojo, and after this, every sorcerer left intended to take down Sakuna, but he picked them off like flies. However, when Yuta got his turn, it seemed like he might have a chance. Initially, Yuta and Rika were supporting Yuji in fighting Sakuna, but at one point, Yuta used his domain expansion Authentic Mutual Love on Sakuna. Within this domain, Yuta had access to all his copied curse techniques, and he used many of them to try to defeat Sakuna, even using Sakuna's own cleave technique against him. Because of all this, it seemed like Yuta and his teammates might actually defeat Sakuna. However, in response to all of Yuta's effort, Sakuna being Sakuna uses rope cutting slash and cut through Yuta, nearly cutting him in half. At this point, it seemed as if Yuta was done, but he actually had one more trick up his sleeve. Before everyone had started fighting Sakuna, Yuta and Gojo had created a backup plan in case Gojo was defeated. The plan was that Yuta would have Rika eat Kenjaku's body so that Yuta could copy Kenjaku's brain switch technique. This would allow Yuta to put his brain into Gojo's body and use Gojo's powers once again against Sakuna. Initially, because of the nature of the brain switch, many people were against this plan. However, Yuta was sick and tired of letting Gojo have to bear the responsibility of always being the monster and wanted to help relieve Gojo of that responsibility. And he did just that. When Yuta's body was cut in half, Rika was able to keep him alive long enough to make the switch, and Yuta as Gojo proceeded to fight Sakuna. And when they both met, Sakuna and Yuta used their domain expansions and went at it. However, for Yuta, while he had access to Gojo's techniques, because of how complicated the techniques were, Yuta struggled to control them. Because of this, Sakuna started to gain the upper hand, but Yuta had another trick where he used Gojo's blue to pull in a recorder of a recording of Toge's cursed speech. This recording forced Sakuna to stop long enough for Yuta to use Technique Purple, which greatly damaged Sakuna and ended both their domains. And Yuta immediately started to charge up another purple. However, before Yuta could shoot the next one off, because Unlimited Void had ended, Kenjaku's curse technique ended prematurely, and Yuta basically shut off, unable to move his body. Unfortunately for Yuta, even though he had contributed a lot to the fight, he could no longer continue. However, in the end, Yuta's teammates defeated Sakuna, and Yuta ended up staying alive. And thanks to Rika, Yuta was even able to return to his regular body. In the end, Yuta contributed massively to Sakuna's defeat, lived in 2 different bodies, and was able to live. Yuta had a good life.